Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening, even though there is an Astros game. Don't leave. No, no, you can't leave. My name is John Muller. I'm the Associate Head of School and VP for Faculty Affairs here. And tonight, it is my delight to welcome you and be a fellow student. In our third Thursday lecture series, as many of you know, this is our chance to really sit together as a community, as an academic and intellectual community, and learn from some of the great minds that we have among us. Sometimes we welcome guests from distant lands, and sometimes we like to show the kind of hidden talents of the people that we have in our own faculty. So it is with great pleasure that I present this evening's speaker, who, as we saw people come in, we thought to ourselves, oh, this is, kind of the home crowd, and Mr. Yee is well known amongst them. So without too much further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Christopher Yee, who is a founding faculty member here at the school, the Dean of Student Life, a much beloved logic and great books teacher, and a dear friend, hopefully forever. So, Mr. Yee.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see after tonight. I've been instructed, by the way, to pass this extra credit sheet around at the end. So, no sliding, gliding for you. You guys don't know what that is. When I was in college, we had to go to chapels, and so you'd have to slide in for chapel to get chapel credit, and then sometimes students would slide in and then immediately walk out the back door. They called it a slide and glide, so that was the joke. Anyways, I'm here to talk to you about ethical sort of participation in the political realm in late October during a midterm election. That's what I'm doing. The first part of this I manuscripted out because, as I just mentioned, I'm doing that thing, and my goodness, I haven't had a more terrifying experience preparing a talk in a while, but you guys are all friendly, and this is going to be great, and hopefully no one posts this on the internet, or if they do, all of the people, or we turn comments off, and that'd be great too. I don't know. I'm not really on the internet anymore, so it's not going to be that big of a deal for me. But, so I manuscripted it out. The first part of this is going to be really funny because all the things that just got said I'm saying in the manuscript, but, it is what it is. So welcome, everyone, to our third Thursday lecture series. For those of you who don't know me, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Christopher Yee. I serve at the school, as Mr. Muller said, as the Dean of Student Life and an instructor of great books and logic. I also happen to be the only person at St. Constantine crazy enough to give a public talk on politics at the end of October during an election year. I've been told my entire life that politics and religion are the two things you should never discuss in polite company. Yet here I am at an Orthodox Christian school giving a lecture on politics. Pray for me. I mean that, like the more you're praying for me, the less mad you're going to get at me as we're talking. So just keep continuously praying for me in your heart as you listen. Before I begin in earnest, I want to clarify a few things. I will not be telling you for whom you should vote in the upcoming election, nor will I be advocating for any particular political party. I will not be going into the applied ethics of any contemporary political issue, or suggesting that any particular issue deserves more or less of your concern than any other issue. I want it to be clear that I am decidedly not here to further my own privately held political beliefs, nor am I interested in changing yours. Instead, I want to discuss the idea of representative democracies writ large, and what we as citizens owe to the voting process. I'd like to suggest that it is more than just our vote, that how we vote matters. And by how, I don't mean for whom or for what party. I mean the manner in which we do it. When this topic was first announced, a St. Constantine parent who used to write campaign ads and speeches reached out to me with some fascinating and frankly horrifying statistics that do a great job of expressing the importance of tonight's topic. The average voter needs to see a campaign ad 8 to 10 times before they recognize a candidate's name. If the ad is on the radio rather than TV, this increases. The average voter needs to hear a radio ad 12 to 15 times before they recognize a candidate's name. Not like know their policies, recognize their name. Moreover, this is the truly terrifying one, somewhere around 20% of voters decide who they are going to vote for based on what campaign signs they see as they walk into the polling place. Yeah. Now, these stats are from the year 2000, back when Guy Ardebaslan was working on campaign ads. So it is possible that our attention spans have actually increased, and we've become a more focused and careful people since then, but somehow I doubt it. What this tells me is that the average American voter does not take their voting responsibility all that seriously, and perhaps many of them have never considered what it is to act out their sovereignty in a representative democracy. My goal today is for us to understand our voting responsibility, to know what we're doing when we vote, and to gather some of the necessary tools to analyze our voting options calmly and rationally, that we might be ruled by reason rather than our passions in each and every election cycle. To analyze this topic more thoroughly, we're going to go back in time. Now, you might expect, given who I am and who we are as a school, that I'm going to go all the way back to the democracy of ancient Greece or to the Republic of ancient Rome. But just this once, we're actually going to go start a little bit later. I want us to begin in 17th century England with a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes, who some of you hopefully have already finished reading or are not going to sleep tonight whilst reading. I hope it's the former. The Leviathan, Hobbes' aptly named political treatise because it's so large, is written in 1651 in the midst of the English Civil War, which in very overly simplistic terms pitted the crown against the Parliament in a disagreement about the proper balance between the rights of English citizens and the sovereignty of the monarchy. In his treatise, Hobbes sides with the crown and argues that a king's total sovereignty over his people is necessary for a nation to maintain peace and order. Hobbes begins by asserting that all people are essentially equal, and that this essential equality means that all people are equally deserving of all things. He also asserts that all people are essentially free, and have the right to do whatever they deem necessary to provide for their own needs and desires. So invariably, this leads people into a state of war with each other, as over time they are all likely to want the same things, and they have the right to do whatever they can to get them. He famously describes this state of nature being the way humans behave without government intervention, as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This, for Hobbes, is why the sovereign authority of the king is so important. He argues that human beings have only one option to transcend the solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short lives that the state of nature, being a state of war, promises them. They must give up their equality and freedom to a sovereign that will govern them and keep them from a constant state of war. This government, for Hobbes, is based primarily on fear. If I've given my power up to a king and have given him the power to punish me when I harm someone else, I'm going to think twice before I steal or do any other sort of violence against my neighbor. The king simply has too much power for me to feel comfortable crossing him. So the deal works out pretty simply. I agree to give the king all of my power, and in return, the king maintains order and keeps me out of a constant state of war with my neighbors. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. I like not being in a constant state of war. But let's fast forward a bit. Following the Glorious Revolution of 1685, which reduced the power of the English monarchy and expanded the power of Parliament, John Locke publishes his 2 treatises of government in 1690. While Locke upholds the necessity of government to protect people from the violent and precarious state of nature, he does not then grant absolute sovereignty to the king, as Hobbes does. Instead, he argues the following. This might sound familiar. The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. For men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, all the servants of one sovereign master, sent into the world by his order and about his business, they are his property, whose workmanship they are, made to last during his, not one another's pleasure. And being furnished with like faculties, sharing all in one community of nature, there cannot be supposed any such subordination among us that may authorize us to destroy one another, as if we were made for one another's uses, as the inferior ranks of creatures are for ours. So for Locke, the problem with the state of nature is that it turns out to be pretty difficult to protect your rights, especially by yourself. It's not that we are all naturally and rightly at war with another, as Hobbes would say, but that the natural world is full of people who would try to violate your rights, and you're not always going to be strong enough to protect those rights on your own. Thus, for Locke, the purpose of the government is to protect the rights of the people. It holds authority only as long as it protects the rights of its citizens, and once it fails to do so, the authority is no longer legitimate. While Hobbes holds safety and order as the primary goods, Locke argues that the rights of the individual are paramount. Now, our final stop on our quick little tour of the Enlightenment era political philosophy, which can serve as a nice little intro for the Great Books 3 students that will be reading these 3 books as their next 3 books. Amazing. It's almost like I planned this, sort of. Last stop takes us to Geneva in the year 1792, where Jean-Jacques Rousseau publishes The Social Contract. Having seen Locke's ideas win out in the English Parliament, Rousseau offers a stunning critique of that English form of representative government which Locke preferred. While Rousseau agrees with Locke that the rights of human beings are inalienable, that's a very difficult word to say, inalienable and natural, he argues that these rights must be given up in order for a body politic to form. But unlike Hobbes, he doesn't believe that these rights should be given up to a king, but rather to the collective will of the people as a whole, a term he refers to as the general will. For Rousseau, this is the only way in which a legitimate government can form, as it is the only way he sees the sovereignty of the people being upheld within a government system. He argues as follows: sovereignty cannot be represented for the same reason that it cannot be alienated. Its essence is the general will, and will cannot be represented. Either it is the general will or it is something else. There is no intermediate possibility. Thus, the people's deputies are not and could not be its representatives. They are merely its agents, and they cannot decide anything finally. Any law which the people has not ratified in person is void. It is not law at all. The English people believes itself to be free. It is gravely mistaken. It is free only during the election of members of Parliament. As soon as the members are elected, the people is enslaved. It is nothing. The only good democracy for Rousseau is a direct democracy, as it is the only form of democracy that actually upholds the general will. Direct democracy being like where the people all vote for the laws rather than voting for representatives who vote for the laws. Anytime a people governs through representatives, they give up their sovereignty and are functionally enslaved by the very people for whom they vote. As you can probably see by now, the framers of the American Constitution were deeply formed by these Enlightenment-era conversations about political philosophy. And we can probably feel those conversations, tensions, and questions even now as we consider our current political moment. How much freedom are we willing to give up for the sake of order and safety? How much should we be willing to give up? What happens when the will of the majority treads on the rights of those in the minority? How do we determine if those rights are really being infringed? How much ought we give up from our own rights to protect the rights of others? How much do we trust our government to enact our will? How much should we trust it? These are all very difficult questions, and I am not here to propose answers to them. Instead, I want to invite us to think critically about what our vote means, given what Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau have argued for. Our vote, if Rousseau is right, is the only thing keeping us from being enslaved. It is what allows us to be free, though if Rousseau is right, it's literally the only time we're free, but let's leave that aside for the moment. If we throw away our vote or submit it uncarefully, we are frittering away the very thing that makes us a meaningfully free people. If we wanted to do that, we should probably return to monarchy, as if Hobbes is right, monarchy is a much steadier political schema to bring about order and a peaceful life. Moreover, if Locke is right, then our vote exists to protect not only our own rights, but the rights of our neighbors and fellow countrymen. The men and women we elect to office in the judicial, legislative, and executive branches of local, state, and federal government all play a role in upholding the rights of our countrymen. If Locke is right, and it seems like at least a good majority of our nation's founding fathers thought that he was, given that he is all but quoted in the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if you caught that in the Locke quote that I read. Then, in participating in a representative democracy, we are entrusting our representatives with some of our rights and our sovereignty in order to protect both our rights and the rights of those that we love. It would be irresponsible at best, catastrophic at worst, for us to vote for anyone who we don't trust with that kind of power. So voting is a serious thing, a weighty thing, and we should enter into it with the same care we have when making any other weighty decision. You wouldn't change careers on a whim just because a radio ad told you to. You wouldn't send your children to a school just because you saw its name on a billboard. You wouldn't marry someone just because they made you a 30-second commercial about why they were a better fit for you than your other suitors. So if voting is an extension of your power, a means of protecting yourself and your loved ones, and a meaningful part of what it means to be free, it too should merit very careful consideration. So I want to map out 3 basic principles that I believe every citizen of a republic ought to follow when they vote. 1. Your vote ought not be from ignorance. 2. If at all possible, you ought to vote. And 3, you ought to vote after having really understood the core arguments of the candidates, ignoring any empty rhetoric and logical fallacies. So 1, your vote ought not be from ignorance. In his famous funeral oration commemorating the Athenians who died in the first year of the Peloponnesian War, Pericles praised the Athenian democracy broadly, and specifically points out the importance of careful thought in the political realm. He says, "We are the ones who develop policy or at least decide what is to be done. For we believe that what spoils action is not speeches, but going into action without first being instructed through speeches. In this too we excel over others. Ours is the bravery of people who think through what they will take in hand and discuss it thoroughly. With other men, ignorance makes them brave, and thinking makes them cowards. But the people who most deserve to be judged tough-minded are those who know exactly what terrors or pleasures lie ahead and are not turned away from danger by that knowledge." Because politics is often so noisy and demanding of our attention and downright apocalyptic, it is sometimes easier to just ignore it completely and vote without being fully informed. But voting from ignorance, if Pericles is right, is neither brave nor wise. We must be brave enough to consider the political landscape and act accordingly. We can't simply plow ahead doing what comes easy for us because we are too afraid to fully consider what's really going on. We ought not vote from ignorance. 2, if at all possible, you ought to vote. In his last speech, so well after this funeral oration, Pericles continues his admonishments of Athens, but this time rebuking those who want to step away from public affairs and live private lives, leaving the problems of the city to others. He says, "You are in no position to walk away, though some people might propose to do so from fear of the current situation, and act the part of virtue because they do not want to be involved in public affairs. People who would persuade the city to do such a thing would quickly destroy it. And if they set up their own government, they would destroy that too. For those who stay out of public affairs survive only with the help of other people who take action." The Republic will continue whether you vote or not. But if you choose not to vote, it will only continue because other people are participating in the democratic process. It is our responsibility to do our part, to take political action and be involved in the life of the Republic. If we choose not to do this, are we even citizens? Are we even free? Now, it's worth mentioning here that an excellent little essay that philosopher Alistair MacIntyre wrote some 20 years ago called The Only Vote Worth Casting in November. In it, MacIntyre argues the following. When offered a choice between two politically intolerable alternatives, it is important to choose neither. And when that choice is presented in rival arguments and debates that exclude from public consideration any other set of possibilities, it becomes a duty to withdraw from those arguments and debates, so as to resist the imposition of this false choice by those who have arrogated themselves the power of framing the alternatives. I'm pretty sure I agree with at least the first part of this. One should never vote against one's conscience or vote for someone they think unfit for office. I'd argue that the principle of carefully considering one's vote requires this. I'm not totally sure that I agree with the second part of what he said, though, but he's way smarter than me, so whatever. It seems that continued involvement, it seems to me at least, that continued involvement with the political process, even when one cannot vote for either of the major party candidates, is necessary to the health of the republic. And when one is not voting, it seems to me that said involvement must then take the form of argument and debate. But at the very least, it seems clear to me that there can be conscientious reasons to reject casting a vote in a strictly binary system, which is why I don't simply say you ought to vote, but if at all possible, you ought to vote. I think your conscience not allowing it counts as an impossibility for voting. Finally, you ought to vote after having really understood the core arguments of the candidates, ignoring any empty rhetoric and logical fallacies. This is perhaps the most difficult principle of all, as it asks each citizen to be a careful thinker, unswayed by their passions when making difficult decisions. I said perhaps, but of course this is the most difficult principle. When's the last time you witnessed a political disagreement in which both parties were unswayed by their passions? I think the main reason that we're all told to avoid discussion of politics and religion in polite company is that pretty much everyone has a difficult time keeping their passions in check when discussing those topics. Because of course they do. We're talking about the very thing that makes us free, that keeps our loved ones and our neighbors safe. Of course we're passionate. It would be really weird if we weren't. Here's the rub. I don't know about you, but I rarely make good decisions when I'm in a fit of passion. Good decisions and passionate outbursts are pretty much mutually exclusive for me. But these decisions are very important, and making them with a level head is essential. And considering the amount of power we are placing in the hands of our representatives, we ought to be able to consider their characters and their policies with level heads, lest we unwittingly give up our sovereignty, rights, and freedom to those who don't deserve it. Let's travel back in time once more. The year is 427 BC. We're in Corcyra, an island off the western coast of Greece. A bloody civil war has broken out, and politicians on both sides are jockeying for public favor. Thucydides observes the following. Those who led their parties in the cities promoted their policies under decent-sounding names. Equality for ordinary citizens on one side, and moderate aristocracy on the other. And though they pretended to serve the public in their speeches, they actually treated it as the prize for their competition. And striving by whatever means to win, both sides ventured on the most horrible outrages and exacted even greater revenge without any regard for justice or the public good. Each party was limited only by its own appetite at the time, and stood ready to satisfy ambition of the moment, either by voting for an unjust verdict or seizing control by force. So neither side thought much of piety, but they praised those who could pass a horrible measure under the cover of a fine speech. The citizens who remained in the middle were destroyed by both parties, partly because they would not side with them, and partly for envy that they might escape in this way. Again, this is a description of Corcyra in 492 BC. It is not, I don't know, he who has ears, let him hear. When we engage unthoughtfully with the political arena and allow ourselves to be swayed without critical thought by the arguments of politicians, we risk becoming prizes for someone else's competition rather than powerful citizens of a republic. And this can happen very easily. If our passions take over our political considerations, and we lose the ability to rationally consider whether a candidate is interested in justice or the public good, Rousseau's worst fears about representative democracy are realized. Government stops being about the people, protecting their rights to life and liberty and happiness, and becomes instead a sort of democratic fiction. We mustn't let that happen. And I want to put some tools in our collective tool belt to help us out. So, thus ends the scripted part of the evening. Now, do we want to record the next part too? I don't really know.
I'll just use camera audio, so it's...
Yeah, okay, I got things in the back. Zoe, you want to grab the things in the back and then... Yeah, there's that big stack of papers that are curling over on themselves because they're stapled in the corner. Those are for everyone, but I also need one because I didn't print one for me. Whoops. I need one, and then we'll just hand them out there. But great, oh, cool, I can do that too. Grab one, pass it down. Grab one, pass it down. Yeah, sure. So we're about to do something that is going to test our ability to take our passions out from our rational minds and instead analyze arguments, ignoring their logical fallacies. Yeah, their logical fallacies. And here's how we're going to do this. We're going to go through and do a quick introductory course in some fallacies. There are a lot of fallacies that exist. These are some of them. For you parents that have students that either have taken or are taking logic, you probably have heard some of these because despite my best efforts, they continuously use them in arguments against you at home. Sorry, I don't know. I'm not really that sorry, though. I don't know. We're educating a free people. I don't know what you want from me. So we're going to go through all these. I'm going to explain them briefly. And then here's the thing that we're going to do that's really crazy. We're going to watch 6 current political ads for the Texas gubernatorial race. And then we are going to analyze them for these fallacies. Now, again, I want us to remember that what we're doing, this is an exercise that my freshmen manage to do every day, so I know you can do it, is looking specifically at the argumentation and whether it is valid or fallacious, not analyzing the content beyond that. So we're not saying just because someone puts out an entirely fallacious ad doesn't mean you shouldn't vote for them. That's not what I'm saying. But it is the case that you should be able to watch an ad and be like, that's a false dilemma. All of them are going to have false dilemmas. It's political ads. So we'll start with the ad hominem. For the Latinists in the room, ad hominem means... Oh, there's no one. To the person, yeah, ad hominem, to the man. So the ad hominem is the appeal to the man. This is a sort of fallacy of an irrelevant premise, right? It's just kind of, you're making an argument that has nothing to do with the actual argument itself. The ad hominem takes 3 common forms. The first is the abusive, which I've gone through and found lots of spicy examples from real life of political quotes that sort of embody these kinds of fallacies. So, my opponent argues that factory farms should be shut down. He says it's wrong to kill animals unless you really need to for food, and that nearly everyone can get enough without eating meat. But my opponent is just a member of the out-of-touch coastal elite who doesn't understand how real people live. Notice that this argument has nothing to do with whether or not factory farming is good or bad. It's just about that person being a member of the coastal elite, which means nothing as far as this argument is concerned. It is a fallacy. You should ignore it. Moving on, we have the circumstantial ad hominem. This one is harder to ignore, I think. The idea behind the circumstantial ad hominem is because someone else stands to gain if their argument is true, their argument must be then invalid. Like their conclusion has to be false if the conclusion being true would give them something. Now, this one's hard because often we're looking for like conspiracies around every corner, and so you're like, if that person's a member of that thing, then that means if that thing got more money, then it's because they're corrupt. You should just look at whether that thing should or should not get more money. You shouldn't be considering the circumstantial ad hominem as part of the argument. 2 examples. 1, You can hardly convince me that increases in the military budget are desirable when I happen to know that you are yourself a defense contractor. So again, notice, deceptive, because it feels pretty legitimate, right? Defense contractors don't get to make arguments about whether or not we should spend more on defense. But that's not actually engaging with the argument that we should spend more on defense. You have to actually engage with that argument, not just ignore it because the person who's making the argument stands to gain from it. Other example, we can safely ignore that politician's argument that tax cuts for the very wealthy would help the economy. As a member of the 1%, he is only looking out for the interests of himself and his rich friends. Again, this ignores the actual discussion of whether or not we should give tax cuts to the wealthy. This is just an argument that is from the person. It's a circumstantial ad hominem. It's a fallacy. Not good argumentation. Moving on, this one's very popular, especially when it gets down to like back and forth debates on primetime TV. This is the tu quo que ad hominem. This is the idea that because if someone is advocating for something, then if they don't themselves do that thing, their advocation, the argument for their advocation is then invalid. Right? Like, well, you don't do the thing that you say you're doing. It's like the hypocrite argument, right? Like, you don't do this thing that you say we should do, thus we shouldn't do that thing. No, that just means they don't do the thing they say that we should do. It's two different issues. Right? So this politician is arguing for the importance of family values, but seeing as his extramarital affair has recently gone public, his argument is without force. Believe it or not, you can have a legitimate argument for family values and yourself not uphold good family values. Addressing just the person who isn't upholding family values doesn't actually help change the argument for family values. So those are the ad hominems. Those are the persons. The next one is called a straw man. Now, it's named as such because I'm a big guy. It would probably be hard for most of you to run up here and knock me over. However, if I was just filled with teddy bear stuffing or straw and not myself, then you could probably run up and like knock me over really easily, right? This is the idea behind a straw man argument, is that basically it follows the form, my version of this person's argument that I'm putting forward is obviously not good, so that person's argument isn't good. Right? You're like giving a bad version of their argument and then arguing against it to make them look bad. That's not actual argumentation, that's trickery. Right? The general rule of thumb when you're engaging with someone in a discussion, you should always, always, always put forth an argument, or you should always understand their argument as one that they would actually give to you. Right? Not just what your characterization of their argument is. This comes up so much in the pro-life, pro-choice debate, which again, we're not talking about sides on this, but, right, the pro-choice, I forgot a word there, position is absurd. How could anyone support killing an innocent human being? I haven't really met a lot of pro-choice people that think that the unborn are human beings, right? So this is a mischaracterization of their position. Now, I'm not saying that I think abortion is right. I'm also not saying I think it's wrong. I'm not making any comments at all. No, nothing is happening on that frame. But what I am saying is you have to engage with the person who's making those arguments in a way that they would agree with your characterization of their argument. Otherwise, you are committing the straw man fallacy. You are being fallacious. That argument should be ignored. Moving on. The ad baculum, or the appeal to force. Now, this can take a couple different forms. The ad baculum can be like an outright appeal to force, like do your homework or you're grounded. Well, I don't even know if that's an ad baculum. That's just you asserting your parental authority. So that's probably like you should do your homework. Yeah, it would be you ought to do your homework, otherwise you're grounded. Then that would be a fallacy because you're making a moral claim that is being backed up by your force, which is not actually a backup for the moral claim. You'd want to make an argument for the moral claim. Like, you should do your homework because, like, your homework is assigned to you in order to help you learn things that will help you be a happy and healthy individual, and so why would you not do that? Your teachers are trying to give you gold, and you are instead throwing that gold against the wall and screaming, I want candy. So that's the more direct way, but the less direct way, you could also say, like, any kind of, like, big appeal to fear kind of counts as this, right? Like, something bad is going to happen if you don't do the thing that I think you should do, is an ad baculum. So we need a strong military in order to deter our enemies. If you don't support this new spending bill to develop better military technology, our enemies will think we are weak and at some point will attack us, killing millions. Right? This is an ad baculum. You're trying to play upon the person's fear in order to argue for your position. It's a fallacy. Throw it out. Next, appeal to the people, or the ad populum. So, the ad populum, again, takes a couple different forms. You either have the snob appeal to the people, like, you want to be cool, so you should do this. Or you have the, like, everyone's doing it, so you should do this, right? So anytime you have the, like, you know, a real American does this, and you want to be a real American, right? That's an ad populum, right? Because you're appealing to their desire to fit in with a crowd. Or, like, you're smarter than everyone else, so you know you should do this. That's also an ad populum, right? Because it's appealing to their desire to be, like, popular in a sort of standout way. The example I gave is very long. You can read it if you want, but I feel like we understand that. We can move on. Because I want to get to watching ads, because that sounds more fun. Okay. Next up is the ad misericordiam, or the appeal to pity. This argument basically takes the form, you should feel sorry for me, therefore I'm right. This is not a good argument, ever. Right? I get it a lot when it's like papers are late and things. Like, here's all the reasons that you should feel sorry for me that my paper's late, so it's okay that it's late. No, it's not okay that it's late, but I feel sorry for you anyway, so maybe I'm going to give you extension. I don't know. But it doesn't make it okay just because I feel sorry for you, right? The pity and the truth are not related there. So, the senator stated his opposition to giving illegal immigrants a path to U.S. citizenship. I could introduce him to an undocumented immigrant who was afraid to go out to dinner with his kids on Father's Day lest he get stopped by police and deported. So, notice, a very sad thing, like objectively very sad thing, but you feeling bad about that is not evidence of argumentation for the conclusion, right? Now, you could rework that into such a way that it was like, I don't know, all citizens or all people residing in this country should be able to do this thing. This person can't do this thing because of this law, therefore we should repeal this law, right? Suddenly, hey, look, it's an argument. But as it's written here, it is definitely an appeal to pity. It is a feel bad for this person, therefore change your position on this. It's a fallacy. Okay, next, ad ignorantium, the appeal to ignorance. This is basically the shifting of the burden of proof, saying either no one's proved it's wrong, so it must be right, or no one's proved it's right, so it must be wrong. Both of these are an appeal to ignorance. Again, pretty popular. There's no proof. The capital punishment deters violent crime. We can only conclude that it doesn't. Our state is better off without the death penalty. Like, you can't conclude that it doesn't just because you don't have proof that it does. That's not how it works. You can't just say, you've never proven objectively to me that there are no such thing as fairies, thus there are fairies. I happen to believe in fairies, but that's a terrible argument for fairies, right? Because it would be really hard to objectively prove fairies. So it goes. Okay, next up, equivocation. So equivocation is anytime you have a term that is used in two different ways in an argument, or that is deceptively used in a way that the common person wouldn't understand it in an argument. Right, so equivocation, it's basically using an ambiguous term in order to make an argument appear valid that would not be if you were actually using the two different terms. Right, equivocation comes into play because of the problem with language. You guys ever thought about this? Like, language is inherently difficult because we're never actually saying what we mean really. We're pointing to what we mean and hoping that we're pointing to what we mean well, but maybe there's a better word to point to what you mean. I don't know, language is hard. So all laws were created by someone. Nature has laws. Therefore, there is a God who is the creator. Right? What word is being equivocated there? Laws, right? All laws are created by someone. You're talking about political laws. Nature has laws. You're talking about scientific laws, natural laws. Those are different kinds of. You mean different things at that point. Or this very famous unattributed quotation: "The United States does not torture." Right? If you're using a specific version of torture that the UN and everyone else in the world would not use and saying they don't torture, that's equivocation. You're attempting to fool people by saying, we don't do this thing, and by this thing I mean do it while hopping on one foot. It's an equivocation. You're mixing up your definitions in order to make yourself appear more reasonable. Okay, the next two fallacies are related, composition and division. Composition is basically an argument from the part to the whole. So saying like something has this property, thus the group that it's a part of has this property. Division is arguing from the whole to the part. So like some group has this property, thus each part of this group has this property. So composition, my policy serves to make the working class wealthier, thus it will make the nation as a whole wealthier too. That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, just because one group gets wealthier doesn't mean the whole nation gets wealthier. Otherwise, everyone would be wealthy, because there's always at least one group that's wealthy. But that's not how wealth works, and that's a bad argument. Division, right? Either Democrats or Republicans are considered broadly to hold this view. Thus, this individual Democrat or Republican holds this view as well. It's not how it works, right? Like just because a group as a whole holds something doesn't mean that each individual in that group holds something. It's a fallacy. Don't do it. People get tripped up on that a lot, actually, in politics, I think. Like, people will argue against their opponent's party, and the person that they're arguing against will be like, well, I don't hold to that particular position of my party. And they'll be like, but you're in that party, so you do, though. And you're like, no, I don't. But people tend to believe it, because the division fallacy. It's insidious. Okay, next up. This is one of my greatest personal pet peeves. Now you guys can all be in on it with me. The phrase begs the question is a reference to a logical fallacy. It is not a phrase that means, this makes me think of this. To beg the question is to assume the conclusion of your argument in the premises of your argument. Right? Thus, begging the question. You are assuming that what is the conclusion is true as a premise of the argument. That's what it means to beg the question. So next time, like, good luck for the rest of your life. You're going to just hear, well, that begs the question. Like, no, it doesn't. And if it did, that would be a problem. We don't want things to beg the question. That's no good. So, freedom of the press is one of the most important hallmarks of a modern open society, because modern open societies value the ability of the press to report what's happening. Right? Freedom of the press is valuable because freedom of the press is valuable. That's not an argument. You're just saying the same thing twice. It doesn't work. People do this with free speech all the time, too, right? Like, free speech is important because you can't violate free speech. You're like, what? That's not... What? That doesn't mean anything. Like, you're just saying free speech because free speech. That's like... There's no content. That's not an argument. You're just stating something twice in a row and making it sound like it's an argument. That's begging the question. Next up, I have lots of examples of this one because it's perhaps the most popular in all of politics, is the false dilemma. The false dilemma is anytime you artificially reduce the number of choices that someone has. Right? So you actually can choose all of these things, and instead you say it's either this or this. Right? Very popular in the political realm. Right? Vote for me or live through 4 more years of higher taxes. What? Like, no, that's not how that would work. You could also, I don't know, you could vote for the other person and then that person could lose, A of all. B of all, you could vote for someone else that also doesn't want higher taxes. Right? Like, there are so many options available. Just to say one or the other is weird. Or America, love it or leave it. Like, what? Like, obviously there are other options. Like, you don't have to just accept everything that's happening just because you live here. You could also, I don't know, like, criticize it and still live here. That's an option. Like, you don't have to do one or the other. It's a false dilemma. Donate to my campaign if you care about the future. This is one that starts to get tricky, right? If-then statements can also be sort of hidden or statements. Because what's happening here? Donate to my campaign if you care about the future. Like, if you don't donate to my campaign, then you don't care about the future. What? Like, maybe I care about the future and think you'd be bad for it? Like, that's an option. If you want our country to be safe, we must increase military spending. Like, must? There's no other option? Like, nothing else would help keep us safe. Come on. Like, either or. Right? All of these either ors are false dilemmas. You don't get to artificially say you have to choose this or this. People get to choose from the things they get to choose from actually, not just succumb to your random false dilemma. The next one, I didn't even bother to put an example, the ad verecundium fallacy, which is an appeal to unreliable authority. Now, appeals to reliable authority are good evidence for at least inductive arguments, right? Like, if the foremost thinker in, like, sort of particle physics thinks this thing is true about, like, the atom, probably I'm going to be like, yeah, probably that's true. But, like, you know, if, I don't know, Bill Nye the Science Guy tells me God doesn't exist. Like, what? You're an aerospace engineer. Like, what about your training makes me think that, like, you are a reliable authority on this issue? So when you think about politics, I don't know, literally any time someone gets a celebrity endorsement, like, it's an ad verecundium, right? Because, like, what? Yeah, so like someone just having a celebrity endorsement, like, you know, like Garth Brooks is voting for me, like, cool. Why should I trust Garth Brooks to be like a wise political leader or one who tells me who wise political leaders are? Like, he writes great songs. I don't understand what relates. But given the way in which we are a country that loves like celebrity and all those sorts of things, it's very easy to fall into this fallacy because you're like, ooh, my favorite influencer is doing this. I should do it too. Like, no. Okay. Last couple. We have the false cause, which takes a couple forms. First is, this is the most fun Latin of all, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which basically means after this, therefore, because of this. So anytime you say just because something followed something else, the first thing caused the second, you're committing the post hoc ergo propter hoc version of the false cause fallacy. Something happening after something else doesn't necessitate that the first thing caused the second, right? Like, I don't know, like, the sun rises every morning after I get up, so my awakening must cause the sun to rise. Like, no, right? Or the correlation and causation confusion falls into this fallacy as well, which I think is really funny. Like, popsicle sales always increase as deaths by drowning increase. So it must be the case that popsicles are drowning people. Like, or it's summer. So in the political realm, this one most often takes place when people are trying to take credit for like every good thing that's happened since they've been elected to office, even if it happened like the day after they got into office. Right? Like, since I took office, the recession has ended and our economy is on the rise. My policies are working. Like, it doesn't mean your policies are working. Like, it could be that you took office and then, I don't know, like some Fortune 500 company made a lot of money and all the people bought stock in them and suddenly the economy is doing better. Or it could be that you got elected and then everyone else is working against you and has better ideas than you and are actually improving the economy and you just happen to be there. Just being there before something else happens doesn't mean that you're causing the thing to happen. The other version of this is the slippery slope fallacy, which is basically when you say that if one thing happens, then like all of these other train of horrible things are going to follow afterwards by necessity. Like, that's also a false cause fallacy, right? Like, you can't know, like, what was the example I put? Legalizing marijuana will cause people, what? That doesn't make sense. Will cause the number of cannabis users to skyrocket. Ignore people. I don't know why that's in there. Thereby crippling the workforce as people spend more and more time on their couch and less time working hard until eventually a national financial depression will occur. Right? Like, that's not, you can't say, like, you know, weed is legal and now a financial depression occurs, right? Like, that, there's so many things that could happen between those two steps that you can't say that this will cause this. It's a slippery slope fallacy. And then finally, the complex question fallacy, very popular during congressional hearings, which are all the rage these days. Was it exhausting keeping track of all the lies you were telling people? Like, how do you answer that question? A complex question is a question that no matter how you answer it, it will make you look bad. Like, or you just can't answer it, right? Like, if you were asked this question, what do you say? No, yes, right? Like, there's no way to answer it without incriminating yourself. And yeah, it's nefarious. So that's a complex question. Okay, so those are the fallacies. Any questions about any of them before we begin our project together? Yes?
Some of these, when presented, might not be presented in the context of arguments, but more in the context of rhetoric.
Yeah.
So there could be other problems or benefits to some of these, unless you're just analyzing them logically, right?
Yeah, so I think that that's true, right? Like, rhetoric and logic are different things, right? Obviously, rhetoric is the way of like getting people over to your point by like sort of playing on their non-rational parts. I would argue that if you can't put forward a like sort of campaign position without rhetoric, there's a problem. And it's important to be able to recognize, like, having this list of fallacies will like help you recognize, like, oh, this thing that's happening on the screen right now is not an argument. And that's important. It's important to know that it's not an argument. Like, they could just be saying stuff and that's good, like because it's good rhetoric or because like the stuff they're saying is true, but like the idea of one thing supporting the next thing is not an argument, and I think it's important to be able to know that. Yes. Yes.
I was trained as a campaign writer.
Okay.
And we didn't like go over fallacies one at a time like this, but we were definitely taught to use them.
Oh yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
actively taught to use them.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you find them, because they work.
Yeah. That makes sense. Right, and it's part of that attention span thing, right? Like if it's the fact that you have to see an ad like 8 times before you actually remember the candidate's name, then you have to do something that's like punchy enough that it's going to stick in someone's head. Which, again, fine, do that, I guess. But also, you as a voter should not let yourself be immediately swayed by something like that. I think that's the distinction that I'm drawing. This is not a sort of moratorium on all political work. Like, you should not do any of these things. Like, they're going to keep doing those things because they found a thing that works and that's what they do. But I think that we as voters have a responsibility to be able to watch something like that and be like, this is actively swaying my passions. I'm going to slow down and think, is this actually an argument or is this just rhetoric? If it is just rhetoric, is this the sort of rhetoric that corresponds with truth and beauty and goodness? Or is this just someone trying to like make me into a pawn for their game? I think it's important to be able to like walk into those things with your eyes open and like see them rather than just like letting yourself be subconsciously swayed by them. Yeah, so which is why I said at the beginning again, having a full ad that is all fallacy doesn't mean like you shouldn't vote for that person. Definitely, like it just means that particular ad they used is super fallacious. Maybe you shouldn't think about it a lot when you're thinking about whether you're going to vote for that person. Maybe you should instead like read a press release they gave that actually just has like a normal sort of statement of that policy. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to actually stop this thing now. Okay. So one problem I found actually is that I think that campaign ads have gotten more fallacy laden recently. Like initially I was like, what if I just looked at like campaigns from like a long time ago and watched those ads so that no one got mad? But they just like weren't as full of fallacies. And so I went with newer stuff. What am I going to do? Bro. Now I'm over here. Great. This is the side that my HDMI cord is on. And probably turn this on too. Right. Yeah. Oh, it's taking off. So, all that to say, I picked from the current gubernatorial race. I know, I'm a crazy person. But I've picked 3 ads from each of the primary candidates, making a huge sacrifice on my part for y'all. The number of YouTube ads I get that are political now is astounding. I hate it, and I didn't think to go incognito before I pulled up these videos. So now all of the happy things that I normally have, where was it? There's one that's super easy pumpkin donuts recipe. That's the kind of YouTube I watch. But now I have President Trump addresses UN General Assembly. Gavin Newsom demolishes Ron DeSantis. I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch any of this. So the sacrifices I make for you. Also turn the speaker on because there's no speaker on this projector. Is it on here? Yes, it is. Okay, so keep your sheet at the ready. And I would encourage you, in order to help get over the ire that you might start feeling, look specifically at, the candidate that you would vote for and see what their fallacies are and do it that way. It's a good exercise. It's a good exercise to be able to be even this person that I would tend to agree with, I need to analyze their argumentation and see if it's any good. Okay. And we're off.
Number 1, the Texas economy under Governor Greg Abbott. Ranked the #1 state for business every year he's been governor. #1 in exports. #1 in businesses moving to the state. And over 1 million new jobs since the pandemic. But Biden and Beto would destroy it all. Open borders. voters, crushing taxes, the Green New Deal. On March 1, vote to keep Texas number 1. Greg Abbott, governor.
Isn't this going to be fun? All right, what do we see? Let's. Music isn't really incorrect, but like, yeah, no. Yeah, the
Biden.
I feel like you can count it as a light adbaculum. That there's like this like boom, doom when you look at this other person. Yeah.
It was just like only false causes.
Lots of false causes.
Just all.
Yeah, because it's all built on the like
Since.
number one because of me, because I was doing it while this was here. Now, granted, it would be worth, when you get something like that, looking up like what sorts of policies were being put in place, looking at the trends in the overall economy before and since those policies happened, how it changed, because it's not necessarily the case that like he definitely didn't cause that, right? You don't know either way. You'd want to look it up and find more like sort of nuanced ways of seeing whether or not he was causing the economy to do these things. And so,
Oh, wasn't it kind of like the entire thing with false causes?
yeah, because it's like, oh, you vote for me or you're going to get, what was it? It was like, I remember the Green New Deal specifically, because that one, yeah, crushing taxes. He really likes the word crushing in this campaign cycle, by the way. I have another ad that's called Crusher that he released, where we get to watch lots of things go down in pneumatic crushing too, which is fun.
Isn't that list of like policy kind of division also, like those are general Democratic principles, I think, or I don't actually know.
I would probably give him the benefit of the doubt and say that those are things that Beto has said he's like for.
Yeah. Okay.
There's one later where I wouldn't give him the benefit of the doubt because he quotes him and then cuts him off halfway through a sentence. But in this one, I would probably give him the benefit of the doubt and say like, yeah, Beto's probably said he was for those things. It could be a little bit of a straw man because of like the way it's being presented is not the way that Beto would present it.
Well, they wouldn't say crushing. We're gonna do crushing taxes.
Yeah. So it's at least a little bit of a straw man there, right? Yeah. Like, yes, we're here to advocate for crushing taxes. We want to just
I want to crush
demolish
you.
all of the families of Texas. Vote for me. Any other ones? I think we've covered all the ones that I like saw on a cursory glance. But
What about the sources of those number one?
you know,
I'm looking through and I'm trying to find like when it's your commission saying you're number one.
see now you're committing the ad hominem tu quoque. Well, right? Because just because he started a commission and then finds that Texas is doing well doesn't mean that that commission falsely found that Texas is doing well.
Gotcha.
You'd want to look into it.
Yeah.
Chief executive. Well, so I don't know what a lot of these things are, and it could be because I'm not like a business guy.
Sure.
So it would be hard for me to say whether or not these are ad veracundiums. Chief executive, U.S. Department of Commerce feels pretty reasonable. Dallas Morning News, maybe. Texas Workforce Commission.
That's probably right.
Yeah, that's just a stat. So yeah, like a lot of those probably are fine. There could be a couple that might be ad veracundiums.
The governor appoints the bodies to Texas Workforce Commission.
Right, but that's just saying how many new jobs. Like it's, right, if you're just saying like this stat, and it's coming from a stats agency, I don't know. I would give that the benefit of the doubt probably. But look into it. I think the constant sort of message is like, but look into it. Like any of these things you hear, lots of them could be fraught with fallacious reasoning. All right, you ready to go on to the next one?
Yes.
Look at all these other things we could be watching. Well, no, a lot of these are now political ads because that's my life now.
Thank you, Mr. Yee.
Forward,
Oh,
August, from this day forward, August 25th,
Women all across Texas are no longer free
to make decisions about our own body. No longer free to choose if a pregnancy is right for us.
or our families.
Not even in cases of rape or incest.
And women will die because of it.
All because of Greg Abbott's abortion law. It's too extreme, so I'm voting for Beto, who will give women our freedom back.
Oh boy! What do we We notice, yeah.
Ad baculum.
Yeah, a real strong ad
fear-mongering.
baculum. It almost feels like it took a note out of like the Jaws playbook, or like like the rapidly increasing high-pitched
the
piano
great
key.
tone.
Yeah.
False dilemma?
What false dilemma are you saying?
If they're like, okay, so you vote for Beto, and you get to not have incest babies. Or you vote for the guy who likes incest babies.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I can see it. I think the difference there that I would see is that like this actually is a policy that was actually signed into law by that governor, right? And so there's an argument to be made that if the incumbent continues, so false dilemma in as much as like a third party candidate could win, like it's not like you have to vote for Beto in order for that to not happen. But in terms of just comparing Abbott to Beto, I feel like it's at least kind of legitimate because of the fact that this is like specifically a thing that Abbott has like signed.
It's like the same thing with Green Review.
Yeah.
He says.
If he says he wants to do it, then like you have to take him at his word and believe he wants to do it. Yeah, sure.
Would it be a division of sorts?
How so?
I would say because it's like for the left, or like Beto is like for like more democratic beliefs. Would it be a sense of like putting everyone who doesn't vote for Beto like as like attributing like a title to them, like hating like women or something like that?
Oh yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, I could see that.
What about equivocation? I just saw free.
Yeah.
And like
really lot of equivocation happening here,
yeah,
right?
Because like maybe if you were to say free specifically to do these certain things, but on the screen it says women are not free.
Yeah, it is one of those things where like I think the person that was like recording the voiceover copy felt worse about the equivocation than the person that was doing the like graphics copy because they continued the sentence into like a free to do this. Like obviously we're not saying they're not free at all, but then like the graphics copy is like free period. And you're like, well,
yeah, and then I don't know what. Yeah, I guess it would just be the like fear-mongering thing, but like with the die thing, women will die. Well, but also like, are we saying? I don't know if it's equivocation when it's like women is like the equivocation, like all women will die.
yeah, there's a little lack of clarity there.
Some women will die.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like you're saying like women at random will start dying.
So I just thought that was kind of like you should use a more specific.
Yeah, and there is a very strong slippery slope as well, like
Yeah.
you were saying, Mr. Hickman. Like it's like it just goes straight down that rabbit trail. Sophia?
It's appeal to pity too, right? Like,
Yeah, there's for sure an appeal to pity, right? You get like the close-ups of the sad-looking ladies' faces and
The voices, the voice cracks.
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. Oh, there was. I didn't even catch the tear. The tear.
Fell down the face.
Yeah.
It's like
I have one thing to point out, but I don't know. I don't know if it's a
Is
fallacy.
it a fallacy?
I don't know, but
Okay. You
usually
think it's a
someone
fallacy?
with an accent pronounces his name.
Yeah.
I think that's an appeal to something, but I don't know what. Yeah.
Appeal to the people?
It could be an appeal to the people. Yeah.
Because like technically he's like a percentage of like.
I think he's Irish, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So you could consider that an appeal to the people, right? Like there's a sense in which, like using the woman that has the accent to say Beto, and you're like, well, his name's Robert. Yeah. Okay. You ready? We ready for the scariest one of all?
I've heard this one so many times.
Across America, crime has exploded. Police officers killed in the line of duty. And here's Beto O'Rourke.
I really love that Black Lives Matters and other protesters have put this front and center to defund police forces.
That's right. Beto stands with groups that support defunding the police.
And I know that it's an idea that is dangerous to some.
No, it's dangerous to everyone.
No.
Should never be governor of Texas.
No! What do we see? strong straw man. But like a straw man to the point of like, I don't know if you caught the ellipses in the written quote, but what that tells me is that they actively spliced into his sentence and then took another word and then cut off the end of that sentence in order to say the thing that they wanted him to say in that moment, which is like straw man times 1,000,000, right? Like it's like a full-on misquote. Yeah. Yeah.
Would it be a false cause of sorts? Because they say like 40% like it's like crime increased, all, and then it like points to Beto, and it's like all because of this man like running for.
So I think what is being said is more like since crime is on the rise, we shouldn't like have less police.
Okay.
Because you want police. I think is what is trying to be said there.
I think it's just the way, the way it was framed. Like,
yeah, well, it says and here's Beto. Like so, like it's basically like here's a problem, and then instead of having a solution, here's Beto saying this. I think so. I wouldn't call that a fallacy. That's more of just like.
It's also talking about like the specific groups too that he supports. So I feel like that can be connected to the like those groups are causing an increase in crime.
Yeah. There's like the slightly inconvenient fact that I'm pretty sure most of this transcript is like not from like the sorts of protests that Beto's talking about.
Yeah.
Like this is someone looting a convenience store.
Yeah.
Like here we have
like just some
random guy punching another person.
Punching a guy in the back of the head. Like so like yeah, there's a little bit of a cherry picking thing happening there in terms of we are again straw manning by saying like this is the group that he supports and then showing video of probably not actually the group that he's supporting.
Is that kind of a provocation also?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it be like also a little bit of an ad hominem just from the music? Because they're like, he's just like sitting there like on a Zoom call and then they're like playing this like bum bum bum.
I don't know if I'd call it an ad hominem. I think it would be like, I think that whole clip of him is like just one extended straw man situation, right? Because like, and part of that might be like, they're making him look casual while these serious things are happening, when like in reality he was probably just like sitting out on his porch talking to his phone.
It's also the type of straw man that hides itself as a straw man because they showed footage of Beto.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it makes people think, oh, this is what
this
he
is
really
exactly what Beto would say.
Right.
Like with normal straw mans, you're just like, oh, well, this guy thinks this, so and that's wrong. But it's literally showing the footage and then misquoting.
If I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure the particular video that they're clipping is like, he's saying that he likes that the protesters are getting out to support people's rights, and then later is talking about defunding the police. And then like they just kind of cut like the, I like that these people are defunding the police. Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, because of that, like, could that be considered like a division? Because he's talking about a group of people, and then that kind of frames the entire group to like support defunding the police.
Yeah, I think so, right? Like you're saying, yeah, it would be a division because you're saying like this group as a whole does this, so then this person does this. Yeah, no, totally.
That he even said Black Lives Matter. He associates that entire thing.
Which again, and actually that means there's also an example of a composition fallacy here, right? Because like they get less play on TV, but there were hundreds of Black Lives Matter protests where there was no violence happening, and but you're saying this violent video means that all of this movement is violent. That's a composition fallacy. Yeah. Anything else? I'm trying to think if I saw any. No.
I was trying to decide if there was some abusive ad hominem in the beginning, like the idea that somehow this and here's.
Yeah, there is a sense in which they're like making fun of him a little bit, like they're saying like, and here's this Joker. Yeah, there's definitely, but it would be more of like an inflection thing than anything else. Like it's not as outright in the actual copy.
No.
Yeah.
Would it be like an ad vacuum? Like,
Oh yeah, strong ad vacuum. There's sirens. There's black and white footage of like things on fire and people stealing stuff. There's
your city.
Yeah. No, it's 100. No, it's dangerous for everyone. Like, yeah, it's a strong ad vacuum coming through, for sure. No, what false cause are you saying?
Like this like right here, you see 40% increase in police officers killed while on duty, because of like the defunding of the police or something like that. Like those being correlated, is that like a post hoc?
So again, I would say that I don't think the ad is saying, and maybe I'm being too charitable with the ad. I don't think the ad is saying that like defunding the police is causing this, mostly because that wouldn't have been a thing that was happening at that point. It's saying like this is the problem, and look at how poorly he's proposing a solution.
Well,
I think is the argument.
I
That's
think it's
making.
implying that it would, like.
Oh, like that it would keep getting worse.
It would keep getting worse.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. Yeah, for sure. Which I guess it would be that would be more of a slippery slope thing than
Yeah.
Okay, any other ones? All right, let's continue. This one's a little less scary. No, this one's also scary. Wait, I forgot to unmute, sorry.
When I became a doctor, I took an oath. I promised to treat anyone who was in pain. But Greg Abbott isn't letting me live up to that promise. Hospitals forced to turn patients away. That's not why I chose this profession. And it doesn't have to be this way.
When I'm governor, we're expanding Medicaid. We bring $10 billion into communities. We lower your property taxes.
People's health above politics. That's why I'm voting for Beto.
I love the phrase above politics happening in an ad like this. I think it's my favorite part. Yeah, Grace.
Was it like an appeal to pity? Like,
Oh, strong appeal to pity, for sure, yeah.
Like, look at these all poor people.
And it's like sad doctor that like wishes he could treat people but can't because they don't have money. Yeah, there's a strong like you should feel bad, which, I mean, you should feel bad if people can't get medical care that they need, but that doesn't mean that you're right. Yeah.
Is it like division kind of in a way, like health above politics?
So what's being divided from? So because division is like the whole.
Sorry,
of,
not division. False dilemma. Sorry.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, there's like it's either health or politics. If you're voting for Beto, you're voting for health. If you're voting for Abbott, you're voting for politics. Is the sort of implication there, which is super false dilemma.
Is there something with, I don't know, yeah, maybe it's just a false dilemma, but those things feel like not correlated, like kind of, like whatever he, like, I mean, I get what he's saying, but he's using such an intense, like, he's a trauma, like, surgeon, you know?
Yeah.
Versus, like, what he's talking about is, like, Medicaid, which, like, it makes sense why those two things, like, in some situations are, like, connected. But it seems like what he's saying is, like, you know, we're turning people away at the door.
Yeah, of the ER.
Yeah, of the ER. Like, we're not going to operate on you when your head's falling off, like, type thing. Like,
Is that a
yeah.
I don't know, maybe, or like, I don't know, it just feels like there's like some weird correlation that's going on.
Yeah, like the sorts of care that you're not getting are not necessarily the sorts of care that they're like presenting as being.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Couple things. I think it's an appeal to ignorance, that somehow lack of insurance, you're not going to get the medical care, which to me doesn't make sense the way our medical system works right now. Second, I think it's just a non sequitur to say we're going to increase government for people but then lower your taxes. Like that, and that's maybe part of the ignorance. Like you're not following what he's saying because he's going to increase government care for people and insurance and Medicaid, but we're going to lower your property taxes. We're not, Texas is a property tax state. We don't have income taxes. So how then are you going to pay for it? To me, if you don't understand that, you're
Yeah. Okay. So that feels more like an internal policy, like a potential disconnect in the policy itself, right? Like I'm going to do these things and these things, but like where do you get the money to do these things if you're doing these things? But that's not so much that would be more of a problem of. I would say that's more of a formal fallacy than an informal fallacy.
Yeah, the premise is following from the conclusion.
Yeah, because at that point it's just like, oh, this wouldn't all work together. But it's not like I'm giving you bad argumentation. I guess it's, if anything, you're like giving sort of unrealistic promises or something like that. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. And then the appeal to ignorance, I'm trying to think.
He's saying lack of insurance equals lack of good access to surgeries that people need, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, so
if you go into the ER and you're having heart problems, you're going to get treated.
Yeah, so that would be more of
a... It's like the insurance industry, we don't have good insurance in Texas for whatever reason, but we're going to increase insurance, and therefore you're going to get this care.
Yeah, so I would say that's more of a false dilemma than an appeal to ignorance. Because appeal to ignorance would say, like, we don't know that raising insurance won't help, so it will, right? Like, that would be what the appeal to ignorance would be. But to say, like, yeah, like, this has to happen or this is going to happen, that would be like a false dilemma. So, like, if you don't expand Medicaid, then you won't get life-saving care. That would be a false dilemma because there's another option, namely, you just get life-saving care. Yeah. Yes.
There's a strong appeal to the people, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, just generally, like, look at all these things people want. Yeah. Yes.
Is it like stronger? Because in the beginning, like when he was like, we have to turn, well, I guess that's kind of what Charlie was talking about just now, but like he's like, I can help people who need before I've heard.
Under
so, isn't that like a strong man? Because I don't think that's like actually what's happening. Like I don't think that's what.
Yeah. Specifically, the phrase "Governor Abbott's not letting me."
Yeah.
That's a pretty strong straw man. That's not. Yeah, like it's the governor showing up at the hospital being like, "Don't heal that man."
It's like footage of like actually Greg Abbott putting that man like under his custody. It's like, stop that now.
Yeah, it's for sure a straw man. Yeah. That phrase is the one that made me laugh when I was watching. I was like, wait, what?
Not letting
Not letting you? I don't understand.
Is there a little bit of ad veracundium as well? Just like, I mean, he's a doctor, I trust him.
Right, but he's making a commentary about like sort of the politics of medicine rather than about medicine. Right. So yeah, that's totally an ad veracundium. Yeah, because he's not an authority on like best practices for like sort of insurance, right? He's a doctor.
He's a trauma surgeon.
Right, he's a surgeon, so he's an expert on like how you heal someone who has experienced extreme trauma.
No, you should put it this way. Not.
Yeah, totally. And that's a harder ad veracundium to catch because it's like a related topic. This one happens a lot, actually. This is the classic, like, the Stephen Hawking fallacy, right? Or the Neil deGrasse Tyson fallacy. It's like, okay, you're an astrophysicist. That doesn't mean that you're a theologian. And just because you know a lot about the natural world doesn't mean you know a lot about theology. So you saying, like, look at how big the universe is, therefore God doesn't exist. And it's like Neil deGrasse Tyson says God doesn't exist. You're like, that doesn't work. Yeah. But yeah, same kind of thing here. Yeah, it's close, so it makes it a little harder to tell. But yeah, a trauma surgeon doesn't really have the authority to be the reliable witness as to how, like, sort of, yeah, all that kind of stuff works. Any other ones?
Isn't that all of them?
No, I meant like, we've said all of them already.
All of everything.
Right.
Joe Biden's inflation is crushing Americans. And Biden and Beto support higher taxes that would crush us even more.
But in Texas, we are fighting back, cutting property taxes to help homeowners, producing more energy to lower gas prices. And we passed a constitutional amendment to ban an income tax in Texas. If you're tired of getting crushed by Biden's inflation, join us and keep Texas strong.
I like it just because I like to watch stuff get crushed. Yeah, Mr. Peters.
I think that there's a strong appeal to pity by using the crushing imagery and versus the let's stand strong as I'm in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm a handicapped, they're crushing people, I'm one of you guys fighting back.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Is that like an ad backing one? Like, this is your future.
This is what will happen to you. Yeah.
The actual Earth will collapse in upon us.
All chickens will be.
My favorite one was the one where it splits into 6, and you're like, that's a rotisserie chicken. Who thought this was a good idea?
So I think it actually might have to do with like the popularity of attention grabbers
Oh, yeah, totally.
as like
It's
as
100%,
marketing.
it's like
It's it's mimicking TikTok, and that's
Yeah.
so weird for me.
But it's definitely a straw man too. It's like Biden and Beto, of course, the picture of them.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Like the only picture they have
Yeah.
apparently, because they just keep using it as.
But it's like Biden and Beto support crushing people.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what?
Straw man. Yeah, for sure.
There's a false dilemma right at the end.
Yeah.
With which one?
Vote for me or you'll be crushed.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
I feel bad about the like wheelchair thing, but it definitely is.
Yeah.
Well, in the same way that you're like, I don't know, I hope it wasn't, but maybe it is.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like that's the same way with the woman with the accent saying
Yes,
that, where you're like, I
exactly.
hope this wasn't intentional, but it feels like it was, and I
Yeah.
feel icky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be a slippery slope? Because would it be like, it's like Joe Biden's like increase in like taxes is causing us to be crushed, and then like the world crush imagery, like that feels
Yeah.
like a slippery slope.
Yeah, totally.
I've never actually been crushed before.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also a lot of equivocation, right? They're giving you all of this like crushed imagery, and like even in the like normal way you talk about a person being crushed, it's like, what do we actually mean by that when we're talking about taxes? Like, there's no way in which it's totally equivalent. Like you're using different terms. Okay, last one, because we're almost out of time. Oh boy.
Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke. Only one of them has started a small business and met a payroll every single week for 15 years. Today, 4 out of 10 working Texans have to work a second job. Anyone willing to work full-time should only have to work one job. My jobs plan was literally written by the steelworkers, by the pipe fitters, by the electricians, by the plumbers. It is an energy jobs plan. It creates more than 1 million jobs in this state, protects the oil and gas jobs that we have, but expands those to include more wind, geothermal, hydrogen, solar, but it's jobs. High paying, high wage, high skill, and union jobs. I'm going to do them right here in the state of Texas.
By plumbers.
Yes, he did! Literally!
Steel workers, they were literally written by.
He had him in the office.
They were up there. That-
All of them do. They all.
Yeah. No, the jobs plan specifically. You said the jobs plan.
No, that's what I mean. The steel.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, there's like 9 different fallacies happening there.
Yeah, vericundium, because they have no authority to write those plans.
Well, they could. He's not in office yet, so they could have just
They could have written
a
the
random
plans,
plan that
I
he's, like,
guess,
throwing with
right?
him.
Yeah,
This was
okay.
by the steel workers. Like,
Is that also composition, like because it's written by steelworkers, then, because it's written by workers, then workers will profit or something like
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Is that composition or like?
Yeah, sure, I'll accept it.
Definitely false dilemma.
Yeah.
Like at the very beginning, there's Abbott, there's Biden.
Yeah.
No, or there's Beto.
Yeah.
And Abbott. There's no other choices.
Yeah.
Would it be a circumstantial ad hominem? Because at the beginning it said only like one of these 2 people worked it said like a certain kind of job. And
Well,
I feel like,
it's not an ad hominem because he's talking about himself.
okay.
Like he's the one that started the business. But there is definitely in that statement there's a big composition fallacy. Because the implication is I know how to run a small business, therefore I know how to run a state. Which doesn't track. Like running a business does not equate with running a country. That's just not how it works.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if that's the attempt there. More of the attempt of like saying that he started a small business is like, oh, I'm one of you, right? It's less.
So it could be an ad populum, I guess.
Like, oh yeah. Yeah, it's. I think it's more ad populum than.
Yeah.
Okay.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of these
Isn't
things,
that good, the argument?
and this is what's nice about identifying fallacies, is like, if you're not sure which one, you at least know it's a fallacy. So,
Yeah. You can
don't really have
kinda
to worry
tell,
that much.
yeah.
Like, unless you're one of my freshmen who has a quiz tomorrow on fallacies, you don't really have to worry about which one it is specifically, because you can just kind of be like, I know that's bad reasoning, and that's really all you super need. Yeah.
Is there like a little bit of equivocation in like the beginning? He's like, I started a small business, and then he's like, I'm like making your income higher. I just like I don't really know.
I don't know if that's equivocation.
Well,
there's something there.
There's something there.
Smells fishy.
One of these. I feel like there is some communication with like what a job mean and like what type of like wages are we talking about? Like high, excuse me, not even higher, just high
paying,
wages.
high skill,
Yeah,
high, I forget what else.
There's like, it's very vague. Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? What, like,
Yeah.
Because high wages could be the same.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one, like that particular kind of thing is something I'd probably give them a pass for, because it's an ad. Like, you're not gonna say exactly this many of this type of job paying this wage, because it's just not gonna fit in a little infographic over the top of the 30-second ad. But, yeah, Zoe?
Yeah, I think also with Steve, because like he's talking about how like these people are so hard. Or well, I guess that is still like kind of appeal to the people because he's trying to talk to and say y'all are so hard.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to he's trying to create a feeling of like community amongst what he, I think, perceives to be his voting bloc, and say like, look, we're all the same, we're all together, you want to be like me, I want to be like you, we all want to be like each other, like, yeah, there's definitely that kind of thing happening. Yeah.
It's like, is it like a little bit of like, maybe just a tiny bit of composition? Because he's like every person with like low paying jobs can't afford to feed their family. And it's like, yeah, every teenager who works at McDonald's, like, I don't think they're going to be able to afford to feed their family.
Yeah, he does say 4 out of 10, so he gives an actual statistic, and then he's basically using that, I think, to springboard into like, it shouldn't be that way. So I think, yeah, there is, if anything, it's like maybe there's like an equivocation there, because you're kind of messing with the stats, because if you say 4 out of 10 people and you're not actually talking about independence, you're talking about dependence too, then that would be a problem. But that would be something you'd have to look up, the actual statistic and how it was calculated, because it could just be a statistic. Okay, well, we're 5 minutes over, but thank you so much for coming to this. Science. I'm gonna have to watch so much random stuff to